I want to talk to you about feeling peace. I know that students never feel stressed out. This is a professional Australian tug-of-war team. How many here know an Aussie? You ever met an Aussie? I love the Aussie. I always had all Australian students in my ministry when I was at UOP. And Australian students are a phenomenal group. And Americans get along with Australians really well because we're both, you know, ex-criminals kicked out of the UK. That's always nice. There's something very utilitarian and tough about us. But I love this picture here because this is the way my life feels a lot. Can anyone identify? You just feel like you're pulling on your grades and your relationship. You're trying to get your life in order. And I don't know if you are like me, but how many suffer from this very common, well-documented malady called biting off more than I can chew syndrome? Has anyone got that disease here? Yeah. And you know, we blame our stress on the modern world, our professors. You know, I don't know if you have that very difficult professor, Dr. Lucifer, this year. Anyone taking Dr. Lucifer? Those of you that get that joke, please share with others. So I'd say about 40%, 40-60% got the joke the first time, and then maybe 65% the second time. But I was an art major, and I'm not ashamed of telling you that. And I always say, sometimes I go places, I say this, people, art majors get upset with me, but I just want to be absolutely honest and let you know that it's so easy being an art major. You know, I come to Stanford, UC Irvine, UCLA, I meet all these engineering students, and I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I meet accounting majors, and you know, in the school I went to, we were a very well-known school for accounting, so the big top 8 accounting firms always recruited from us, and you can just tell these accounting majors on their way to finals because they look pre-aneurystic, you know, the veins were coming out. And you watch the art majors on their way to their finals, and we're just like, hey, dude, you know. Because my final basically was this. I would sit down, and I would sit in front of my peers' art, and I would be, the paradigm of the cataclysmic crashing of your color schemes is very jarring in my psyche. You know, and I would say something like that. You know, you come up with basic, you know, bad essay 101 verbiage, and you can get an A in art. So I'm not that brilliant, but I did run into a few moments in my undergraduate career, especially where I just had too much going on. And I can remember one semester I was suffering from what I call expectations inflation. Okay, so this is expectation. You know, everyone here knows what inflation is, right, from a monetary sense. Expectations inflation is when this happens to every area of our life. It's more and more is expected of you, and the more you do, the less impact it really has. And you know, when I grew up, you could kind of sort of choose what person you wanted to be. So you were either, you know, you were either an academic person, or maybe you were an athletic person, or maybe you were a stoner at my high school. Or I grew up in a rural area, so we had cowboys too. You could choose that category. Nowadays, you are really not allowed to do that. Nowadays, it's like you've got to be good at everything. You've got to be extremely good athletically. You've got to have, you know, guys, we all have to have ripped stomachs. Do you ever see, like, there are no subcutaneous fat people allowed on TV anymore. You ever notice this? Everyone is like, it's like a cooking show, and the guy's like, I'm going to take my shirt off, and he's got ripped. You know, and then you're not allowed to have body hair anymore. Everyone is just like groomed and perfumed, and their body is oiled down, and they're like, you know, it's like an auto mechanics show, and yet they're like, and I want to ask you this question. Why is it that the beards don't grow very long on Lost? You know, they grow like 4 days beard, and then they stop right there. Have you ever noticed on Lost that everyone's jeans are more cleaner than yours, even though they don't have laundry there? It's just wrong. And the whole idea is this: you've got to look beautiful every second of every day. You've got to be exfoliated, and not only do you have to look beautiful, you must know how to build websites. If you cannot build a website, I don't care what your major is, if you do not know JavaScript and this and that, then you are a loser, and then you've also got to have this incredible major, and God forbid you don't know what your major is. You know, do you ever feel like everyone's asking you all the time, especially if you're a freshman, you know, what's your major, what are you studying, what are you doing? And if you don't know, then it's like, You are a loser. How come you don't know your whole next 30 years right by this semester? And then on top of that, you got to be physically perfect, and you got to be technically perfect, and you got to be academically perfect. You got to be relationally suave. You got to know how to play the girls or the guys in the game, and your Facebook profile's got to be very, very interesting. And you got to, did you poke him? I didn't know. No, I lost. I hate that. And so it's like in every single area, you're being tugged. There's an inflation in every area. I can remember my junior year in college, I had taken this very, very difficult art history class. And it was very difficult because the professor was brilliant. You know that is true, right, by the way? The more brilliant the professor, the more difficult the class. But he was so brilliant that he actually got us to think that we could actually do this level of work. And so he was a really funny guy because he would come into class and he would begin every lecture with a trivia question, often totally unrelated to the subject. And he would say, you know, like one time I remember he came in and he asked us about the nature of cosmic vacuums, and no one knew the answer. And then the next day he asked us about a Carly Simon song. I mean, that's the kind of way it was. And if you didn't answer right, if you raised your hand and didn't answer right, he would look at you and say, wrong, really wrong. Just like that. It was Quentin Fincher was his name. But I was trying to, I wanted so, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but the bigger the chance, I wanted to get an A in this class really bad. I just wanted to impress this guy. You know, I really, really wanted to do well in this class. And the final was coming up. And it was about this time of year because the NBA finals were on too. And I can remember one of my roommates, I had this freaky smart math major roommate. So even though I was an art major, I'm just studying hour after hour after hour. I'm not joking, my roommate Dana, he was not a math education, theoretical math, whatever, he's a high school, he's a superintendent of a school system now, but he did not buy one textbook his whole undergraduate career. Not one. The day before the math test, he would go to the library for an hour, check out the book, peruse it, go into the class designed that you wouldn't finish the test. One of these tests, you know what I'm talking about? Finish the whole thing 20 minutes before anyone else and make a note at the bottom of the last page telling the professor a more accurate way he could have asked the last question. He was one of the, you ever meet these people? You know, they're like a little bit Asperger-y, you know. And so he never studied, he just read science fiction. It just so burned me. I'm like, I'm the art major. I'm studying more than the math major. But he had this big party. And he had this big party, he invited all these friends over to watch the NBA finals. And I told myself this insanely stupid thing, and that is I could study and watch the game at the same time. You ever tell yourself a lie like that? And so, you know, they're ordering pizza, they're yelling, they're screaming, and I realized about a half an hour into this thing, it's like, there is no way that I'm going to get this done. Now, I also have to tell you a side story. As an art major, I really liked sculpture. I almost switched my concentration to sculpture my senior year because I got into it. I had this insane cult-like professor named Papadopoulos, and he was the sort of guy who would call you up on Sunday afternoon and say, "Why are you not in the studio?" And he would yell at you, and you would like, "I don't know why I'm not." And you would run in. All the other students would be in there, and it was really like a cult. We were all like in fear of him, like, "I'm working hard, I am." But it was really inspirational. He was a total nut. But I had worked so hard in this sculpture class that one night at 3 a.m., this is a true story, I was carving on some wood and I just jabbed at my wrist. You can see, do you see the scar right there?
Oh man.
Just right in my wrist. And so luckily another graduate student was in the studio too, and I just went into his studio and I was like, "Hey, can you take me to the emergency room?" I said, "Sure." So I went to the emergency room and I had this big bandage on my wrist. And so I thought to myself, if I'm going to get any study done, I'm going to have to leave here. And I didn't want to go to the library because unlike probably here at Stanford, people actually just figured out who they were going to date in the library. That's about all that happened at our library. You know, so it's like that whole thing of like, "Shh, quiet." And people are just talking. So I'm not going to go to the library, so I think to myself, I'm going to go to my fiance's apartment, who's now my wife, Kelly, because she had left for the weekend to go visit her mom. So I thought to myself, being the classic bite off more than you can chew person, I'm going to go to her apartment, and what I'm going to do is I am going to, well, that rings a bell, doesn't it? And I'm going to go to her apartment, and poor guy, had to get ignored. Go to her apartment, and I'm going to get all my studying done, and then I'm going to straighten up her kitchen and living room, and then when she comes home that night, all my studying will be done, and I have done, take note guys, one of the most romantic things a human male can ever do. They say girls want flowers, that girls want candy. No, girls want a guy who can do dishes. Really, it's absolutely true. It's almost unfair how well that works. So, I go over there and I start studying, I get in my study groove, and I'm making some good progress. And all of a sudden it occurs to me, you know, the problem was the noise level. It wasn't the actual basketball game. It was all those people talking and eating pizza. I could turn on the basketball game and kind of review my notes. And so I slipped on this tiny little TV, I turned it on, little tiny TV she's got there, and I'm watching the game, and I'm studying, and it's going well, and I'm thinking, you know, the thing that this study moment lacks is a little bit of the popcorn. Because everyone knows popcorn or fish, one of those two things is brain food. So I go on this, now, you have to, again, I'm 42 years old, I remember before email existed, so I'm very, very ancient, extremely old man. So you have to remember that back in these days, we did not have an invention you take for granted now called microwave popcorn. In fact, the academic future of America has been bolstered by the invention of microwave popcorn. Students all over the world use it. But back in those days, we actually had to pop the popcorn ourselves. And there is a way to do it. It's not very difficult. You put a pan on the stove, you put some oil in the bottom of the pan, and you put, once the oil heats up, you put seeds in the oil, and the oil will pop the seeds. And you have to shake it so the popcorn does not burn. How many have made popcorn this way? Anyone tried this? You should try this sometime if you want. But so I go in there, I put the oil in the thing, and I light up the stove, and just when I do that, the TV goes, like there's a big play. I'm like, oh my goodness, so I think the oil's going to take a minute to heat up anyway. So I run back into the living room, and I look, and of course this is very controversial, foul, and I do extremely irrational thing. I begin talking to the TV. Anyone talk to the TV? And I'm like, oh, I can't believe it. I've got this little black and white TV, and I'm telling the ref who was there live next to it that he's wrong, and I'm yelling at the TV, and I get distracted, and I get so into it that the next thing I know, an incredibly harmful thing happens. Now let me just do a side sermon here right now. If any of you ever go into safety technology, I want to tell you the sound that fire alarms make do not help people be more safe. At the moment when you need to think safety, you do not want your adrenal gland to empty in the way that my adrenal gland emptied. Because I'll tell you what, this noise does not make you feel safe. Doesn't make you think rationally, doesn't make you say calmly, put out the fire. I get this blaring noise coming. I look at the kitchen, and out of my kitchen is the Kuwaiti oil fires. You know, it's just black smoke. And I run in there, and my brain tells my body, do not put an oil fire in Wadi, but my body takes over. It's like, get out of the way, brain, you've messed this up already. And I put this thing in the sink, and a billow. It's amazing I didn't get burned, because steam and oil flies everywhere. And that steam, of course, carries the smoke even further, which makes the 2 fire alarms in the living room go off. Brilliantly, I think I have got to get, I take a broom for a second, I try to hit them, because it's an old apartment with high ceilings, and I cannot hit the thing off the wall, and so I think I've got to clear the smoke, so what do? I open the door to the hallway of the apartment, which of course makes the 3 fire alarms in the hallway. Now I've got like 5 or 6 fire alarms going up and going nuts, and so we had this little rule, Kelly and I, that she never went into my bedroom and I never went into hers, but I'm like, I got to break the rule, because it's the only window in the place I know I can open. So I bust into her bedroom, and it's this old window, kind of similar to this, like 2 panes right there, and I try to open it, and it will not open. And meanwhile, it's just blaring like crazy, and I'm like, it's painted shut. I'm going to have to hit this window open. So I hit the windowsill once, and I hit it again twice, and it still won't open. I hit it the 3rd time, and when I withdraw my hands back through the broken glass, I look at my bandaged hand, it's totally fine, and then I look at my other hand, you see this scar right here? And I can tell what my pulse is. I'm just looking. And I'm bleeding all over her clothes. I've got schoolwork, you know, it's just a mess because it's finals week, you know, and all this craziness. And so I grab a towel, I don't know what it is, I'm just soaking blood in the towel. I go across the next door neighbor, I bang on his door because I know the procedure now. And he opens the door, and it's this big basketball player, and I looked at him and I said, dude, I cut myself really bad. I gotta go to the emergency room. He's like, the brakes are out in my car. And he slams the door. I'm like, okay, I'll just die here then. I called my roommate up. I'm starting to go into shock by this time. I'm like, blood, popcorn, and blood. And he's like, I'll be right over. Because he knows me. He comes over, we get into his Volkswagen Rabbit, and we drive. You know, it's a bad sign when the people at the emergency room know you by your first name. Oh, Kurt, come on in. And of course they patch me up, you know, and I got this giant compression, you know, bandage on the thing in 6 or 7 stitches, and my little fingers are just sticking out of the band-aid. And I've got, you know, for about 3 months I'm wearing 2 wrist band-aids, you know, while it's healing. And people are coming up to me and they're like, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. Like, no, really. Sometimes we say we're okay, but we're not okay. You can share. Are you okay? Yeah. And I'm like, I'm not suicidal. I'm just uncoordinated. And I bite off more than I can chew. And I get stressed. And I do stupid stuff. How many do stupid stuff when you get stressed? It's so funny because my roommate said to me, he said, now, do you want me to take you back to our place? Or, you know, and I said, you know, all my homework's there. I'm still not actually done studying yet. And the place has got smoke damage and blood. And the kitchen's a mess. It's like, okay, so he brings me back to my fiance's apartment. And I go up the stairs. And I unlock the door. And I go in. And I start to try to clean stuff up. But my hand is throbbing. And I really, literally do not have, you know, use of my right hand. And so finally I just sit down on the couch. And I expected Kelly to get home about 8 o'clock, and this was probably about 6:30. I sit down on the couch, and I hear the door, lock in the door. And she opens the door. She doesn't say a word. She just looks around. Smoke damage, still stinks. She sees the blood on the carpet. She sees the mess everywhere. She looks at me. I'm wearing bandages. I'm going to be, now speakers exaggerate all the time, but I'm going to just tell you, next time you meet my wife, you can ask her, she will verify. She looked right at me, this is all she said. I need to know if this is going to happen all the time. Of course to that, I said, yes. Yes. Before you say your vows with me, you really need to know, yes, this is going to happen all the time. I want to talk to you tonight about what happens when we get stressed out and what we can do in a really super practical way to combat that sort of stress that we feel that makes us do stupid stuff. And I want to look at Gideon here. Now, I love the story of Gideon. I love the story of Gideon for several reasons. First of all, I love the story of Gideon because God sees potential in Gideon that no one else can see. In fact, this is not a condemnation of other people. Gideon was an absolute scaredy cat wimp who made God go to extreme lengths before he realized that God was really true. I think even those of us that are very, very faithful to the Lord, there's a part of us that are like, you know, God, would you please prove yourself to me again? Especially in the moment of stress, you know. God, I love you, but I'm doubting you at the same time. Do you ever feel that duality in yourself? Gideon is this guy. That God, even in the midst of Gideon's shyness and Gideon's family problems and in the crisis that's going on in Gideon's life, God sees potential in him. Now, what is this shyness caused by? Well, we know that Gideon has a very domineering dad. Gideon's got a dad that out of survival or his personality, probably a mixture of both, has made a pact with the enemies of Israel. Gideon's dad is involved in idol worship, and Gideon's dad has found a way to survive in a time of famine by compromising with Israel's enemies. The context of this passage is just like the movie Ants. A lot of times you'll read commentaries on this passage and they'll say, and Israel was in a time of war. This was not a time of war. This was a time of extended, ongoing defeat. There were little skirmishes where Israel tried to get out of this. But really what was happening is Israel would grow their crops, and like the grasshoppers in that movie Ants. How many know what movie I'm talking about here? They would just come in and take all the food. The main problem you have to know about to understand this passage is everyone in Israel was stinking hungry. How nice are you when you have low blood sugar? Do you lose your niceness at the low blood sugar? Are you really a wonderful person when you've got a taco value meal in you, and then when you're just starving, you're like, "Urgh." I am that way. Now, what happens here is that Gideon one day has a stranger visit his house. This is not his best friend. This is not a family friend. This is not an uncle, aunt, cousin. And according to the hospitality rules of his culture, see, because he lived in a very harsh time, a harshness that we in our world very rarely understand. The hospitality rule is a stranger shows up at your door, you treat them nice, you feed them. And during a time of famine and war, Gideon obeys the hospitality rules. He does an incredibly selfless thing. Now this is extremely important because I really believe that selflessness trumps talent. Selflessness trumps your skills. In other words, God might be impressed with your skills, but He's really looking for selflessness. And Gideon, even though he's meek, even though he's got family problems, even though there's serious dynamic, weird, dysfunctional dynamic problems going on in his family, Gideon passes this crucial test with God. He goes into a time of famine and fixes a fine meal for the stranger that shows up at his doorstep. Now at this point, Gideon doesn't know it's a messenger from God. He doesn't know it's a representative of God. And literally, in Gideon's culture, to be a messenger of God is to literally be the mouthpiece of God. If you look at a messenger of God, you're looking at the lips of God, the mouth of God, literally. And Gideon comes out, he passes the test, and the angel says, hey, by the way, you ought to know, this is God speaking to you. And to prove it, a fire comes from heaven and consumes the meal that Gideon has so graciously provided for the messenger. At this point, we pick it right here in the passage. When Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, "Ah, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." I've literally seen the lips of God. But the Lord said to him, "Peace, do not be afraid." Why was Gideon afraid? He knew, as a corruptible person, as a person filled with fear and insecurity, that if he really saw God, he would die. And the Lord says this profound and awesome thing to him. Peace. Do not be afraid. You are not going to die. So Gideon built an altar to the Lord there, and he called it, "The Lord is Peace." Then it goes on. A lot of people stop when they're talking about this passage. They stop right here. But to me, this is the coup de grace of the peace passage. That same night, the Lord said to him, "Take the second bull from your father's herd, the one that's 7 years old." And the Lord goes on to say, "I want you to march it right down to the false idol altars that your dad has built in front of the city gate. I want you to dismantle what your father has built. I want you to kill his bull. I want you to burn the altar, put the bull on the altar, and burn the bull as a sacrifice to me." Anyone here have a strong personality dad? Anyone here, your dad is a strong personality type? My dad, I'm telling you what, you touch anything he owned, he could sense it. He had spider sense. Kurt's in the garage touching my wrench. You know, he could just know. I just kind of walked in a little bit of fear of my father, and that's very important as we understand this passage. Let me get practical here with you. There's three things I believe that if you understand them in the midst of extreme pressure, expectation inflation, a tug-of-war on your life, you can experience peace. And I want to say the important thing about Gideon realizing that the Lord is peace here is that there is no relief from conflict in Gideon's life. In other words, Gideon experiences peace in the midst of conflict, not by the removal of conflict. Sometimes I think in our world we've got this idea that if we could just work hard enough, be skilled enough, we could arrange the pieces of our life so that we could absolutely have peace. And I want to tell you, life is so chaotic and there are so many more variables than any one of us, no matter how talented we are, can handle. To go about the idea of arranging your life to make it peaceful is a futile idea. So in the midst of the conflict, in the midst of the war, in the midst of the defeat, in the midst of the family problems, Gideon has these three experiences. First of all, he realizes that peace is directly related to size. Now, I told you earlier that I was an art major, so you're going to have to forgive me because I'm going to talk about the cosmos for a moment. And art majors, we love to look at the cosmos. We love to paint the cosmos and all starry nightish and cut our ears off. But we're not very good about talking about it. And so I might use a few terms that are not as accurate. Like, for instance, the distance between the Earth and the Sun, I believe, is several gabillion miles. It's a very long, long way. It's gabillions. And which is really amazing that it's so far away, and yet one solar flare hiccup can cause all sorts of wacky things to happen to our cell phones here. But the truth of the matter, it's so freaky far away, very few of us can understand how truly far the sun is away. Now that is amazing only because if we talk about how far it is from the sun to the outer regions of our solar system, and poor what was the planet that lost its status as a poor Judo, way out there. I feel sorry for Judo, but you know, the truth is, you know, you're fired, Judo. It's true. You look at the arguments, it's out. But the point about it is, it's the reason it took us a long time to figure that out about Judo is because, here's another technical term, from the sun all the way out to Judo, hecka long. It's hecka long distance. Okay? This is only amazing if you understand the amount of space between this sun and the very next sun, which makes the hecka long distance seem very short. In fact, we're going to combine two terms. It's hecka-gabillions. Hecka-gabillions long between our sun and the next sun, which is only amazing if you understand how backwater-ish, far away, cul-de-sac-ish our couple of little solar systems on the edge of this galaxy are from the rest of the mass of matter in our galaxy. Which is only impressive if you understand what a backwater, little, tiny, you know, Barney Fife-ish galaxy that we live in the collection of galaxies that is kind of a lost little corner of this thing that we call, and by the way, let me say something very clearly. Anyone who tells you they understand the nature of the universe is a liar, and worse yet, a self-deceived liar. Because how big this universe is and what really are the variables that make it up. What we believe about the variables of this universe will be laughable to the students that are in these seats 25 years from now. But all of that to say, the Bible says this, that universe fits here in God's hand. It, from the span of his thumb to his pinky, this is our universe. Gideon sees an army against Israel that is so big, he thinks there's no way we can defeat it. He sees an economic problem in the famine so big that there's no way it can be defeated. He sees a problem in his family that is so deep-rooted in father-son relationship, there's no way that he can have peace in any of this. And then one day, the God of the universe shows up, and he sees that God face to face, and he realizes the problems are big, but God is so much bigger. I can have peace in the midst of these problems. I want to tell you, I don't want to minimize the pressure on you. The relationship problems, the economic problems, the school problems you might have. But I want to tell you, every once in a while, if you'll see God face to face, I'm not talking about having a nice song experience. I'm talking about laying in your bed at night with no one around and saying, Lord, come into this room. I'm talking about truly setting aside all other priorities and saying, Lord, I want to know you. Consume a meal before me, God. And show me how big you are. When you take your problems in this hand and the size of God in that one, your problems will be much more manageable. He's a big God. You want to know a deep theological thought? God big. You want to know an even better thought? Me small. God is very big. No matter how big your problems are, he's bigger. Gideon learned this. And the second thing Gideon learned is that peace is directly related to safety. How many here have ever been in a parking lot late at night? I want to ask the gals in the room, how many of you know about the whole key thing? You put keys in your fist. You done the key thing? So you get out of Safeway and you're like, maybe I didn't need coffee at 11 o'clock. And I've got some, and now I'm alone in this parking lot. And you're looking, everyone looks bad. Everyone looks bad at night, you know. You're like, yes, he looks like a 92-year-old man, but he could be ferocious, you know. Okay, now I got to ask you this. How many of you, to be honest, of the guys, you know that they teach the key thing in women's self-defense classes, right? How many guys have put their keys in their fist? And I do it all the time. I'm like, I don't care. I don't care if it's a girl technique or not. If someone comes at me, I'm going to poke them with my Toyota. Trying to rape me, you're getting a Toyota key right in the nose. Because I'm not ashamed about my safety. I want to stay safe. I don't like being beat up. It's one of my goals in life to not be beat up. And I'm a chicken, and I admit it. But this is the thing is, you cannot feel peace if you don't feel safe. Do you ever have a roommate that is, how can I say this? Some people do not understand personal closeness. I had a roommate once, and he had really bad breath and no sense of how close to me he was. And so he'd be like, hey, Curt, how was your day? How was your day today, Curt? You know, and I was like, Jeff, like, imagine you have a hula hoop on. I could not relax in that living situation because I just didn't, there's something about him, I just didn't feel safe. Now imagine Gideon, he's this meek guy, he's got this dominant dad, he's just trying to make it through in life, and all of a sudden God shows up in his life and says, hey, you are more important than you think. You can't skate through, I want to use you. And for you to have some peace, you got to know how big I am. And the second thing you got to know, this is so profound to me. Before, God's not really concerned about his warrior skills at all. He's not asking about his agility. He's not asking about his ability with a bow knife. He wants to know if you'll believe him when God says you will not die. We fast forward a few chapters later in this exact passage, and here Gideon is with a minority battalion going up against superior technology, a larger army, more experienced, more confident, and yet Gideon, marching up a hill with sword drawn, has no fear at all. What turns him from this wimp into this incredible warrior? Well, I can only imagine that he actually believed God and thought, I'm not going to die. Have you ever seen this movie, Big Fish?
Yeah.
I love this movie, Big Fish. I love it because I like the father-son theme and all that, but what I love about the movie is every time the main character gets in a difficult situation, he's like, well, I just went up for it because I knew this is not how I die. Because early on in his life, this woman had told him how he's going to die. And so he lives his whole life fearlessly. He's having these incredible adventures, incredible relationships. This is what it means to feel safe. To know that God has looked at you and said, I knit you in your mother's womb. I know you intimately. And you know what? Your future is in my hands. I wanted to tell you something very, very important. No matter the competition in your major, no matter the complexity in your life, you are more safe than you know if God is on your side. Just every once in a while, we have to revisit the safety net of his grace and say, you know what am I so worried about? The beautiful thing about the safety net, how many have seen the circle leg and the circus things? They got the fancy, back when I did, they just had clowns. Now they got people from France that are made up really nice. But I was watching this once and a guy fell. And you can't see it because of the lighting, but there's a net. And they kept trying to make the lighting look like there's no net, but there's a net. And guess what? On the way down, he kind of did this little move to make it look like it was on purpose, but you could kind of tell it wasn't. And when he hit the net, he did an amazing thing. Guess what he did? He bounced. I just want to tell you, when God's on your side, even if you screw up, there's a big, wonderful bounce. You're safer than you know. The last thing you need to know about peace is that God's very big. God's a very, very good protector. And the last thing you need to know, and this is kind of counterintuitive, is that you can't really experience peace in this life unless you're willing to make a sacrifice. We really are owned by things and stuff far more than we think we are. We really are driven by accumulating Sometimes it's accumulating stuff. Sometimes it's accumulating degrees. Sometimes it's accumulating friends. But there's something in the human soul. We are like my goldfish when I was 12. Killed him. I gave him food. And he ate and ate and ate and blew up. Like at the end, he was like, I don't want to eat anymore. But you keep sprinkling it in, you stinky pre-adolescent dork. I am genetically engineered to eat all the time. And he just blew up. We gotta live our lives that way. Oh no, it's another version of the iPod. I already have 3. I've got to have it. It fits inside of your fingernail. Why the second bowl? Why the second bowl? Why the second bowl? This is so fascinating to me. The second bowl was the 401k plan of the day. You see, the dad owned the first bowl. What's going to happen to the second bowl? This is a time of famine. Very many people do not even have one bowl. The second bowl is Gideon's backup plan. It's his insurance if the God thing doesn't work out. You see, Gideon in his heart, I believed he wanted to serve God. That's why the angel sought him out. But he thought, you know, maybe I'll go the way of my dad. Make peace with the enemies. Intermarry with them. Worship their gods. And my friends might starve to death. My nation might be in ruin. But I'll have my dad's bowl and I'll survive. Jesus said this radical thing. Don't let anyone ever turn Jesus in your mind into Lammy Jesus. You know what I mean by Lammy Jesus? He's that guy that all of his robes are dry cleaned. He makes the funny medieval gang signs. I don't know. But he's got a look on his face like, hey, it's fine, give me a hug. And that's not the Jesus of Scripture. The Jesus of Scripture said this: seek only me. And you'll get everything. Seek everything, you'll lose everything. Because you'll lose me. Another place he said, if you want to live, you got to die. If you want to be free, you have to deny yourself. Pick up a torture device. Show everyone that you're going off to be tortured. And the torture will kill you. Walk the way to the place of the skull. The one-way road to crucifixion. Another way he said it was this: if you would really like to be my followers, don't seek me just because I give out free bread and free fish. In fact, you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. Now, pre-modern people were not idiots. They didn't go, oh, he's a cannibal. They knew. The second he said it, they knew. He's saying that we have to be completely consumed with him. And so they left, except for the apostles. And he said, why aren't you leaving? They're like, oh, we gave everything away. You're all we've got. There is no plan B for the apostles. So even when they wanted to leave, they couldn't. Do you know what it means to be a Christian? What it really means? You got to put to death plan B. You will not have peace if you're serving two plans. God looks at Gideon and he says, I don't want you to starve. I don't want you to have a fight with your dad. But more than those things, I don't want you to be divided your whole life. Tortured by two allegiances. You got to decide. Is it me or is it him? And man, when God asks you to decide, he's very pesky about it. He doesn't ask you to make private little decisions that no one else knows about. He asks you to go down to the city gate, dismantle your dad's altar, and kill your insurance plan. I wish it was less radical than that. But being authentic with the passage, you've got to be honest. God is a jealous God who loves you so much, he refuses to share your future with anyone else. And for you to have peace, you need to know that. One of the greatest stressful days of my life was the day that I ruined my wife's apartment. I literally spent 2 weeks later painting it. But you know, it's one of my most fond memories of her, and it's the reason I love her so much. Because she looked at me, she just looked at me, and she just looked with those eyes that said, "You are such a screw up. And you're just stressed out and worried. You're just running around like just chaos manifest. But I'm going to stay with you. I'm going to love you. I'm going to marry you." In some ways, she was like Jesus that day. And that's the way Jesus is with us. He knows our problems. He knows our stresses. He sees the messes we make. And yet, he comes and sits down on the couch next to us, throws an arm around us, and says, "I love you. We'll clean this up together." Jesus, as the worship team comes, I pray tonight this would be more than just a passage of Scripture to my friends. I know, Father, there's great competition on this campus. I know, Father, that there are many in here like me that have bitten off more than they can chew. I know there's a few, Father, that truly do battle with two allegiances. I ask you, Lord, show us how big you are again. I ask you, Lord, flood our hearts with how truly safe we are. And Lord, I ask, capture us that we would be wholly, fully, singularly devoted to you. Let us know the freedom and the peace of not being divided. And I ask it in Jesus' name. And everyone said it.